Imagine an early human. What do you see? Probably a guy, hunched forward, forehead sloping back at an angle no living person has. A club in his fist, for reasons nobody has ever bothered to justify. Fur over one shoulder, always one shoulder, never both, never fastened to anything. Behind him, the mouth of a cave. Just off frame, a mammoth having the worst afternoon of its life. The odd part isn't the picture. It's that everybody else has the exact same one. Ask 100 people to sketch a Roman, and you'll get 100 different Romans, because nobody's quite sure what a Roman looked like on a Tuesday. Ask that same 100 for a caveman, and the identical man walks out 100 times. Same slouch, same club, same pelt on the same shoulder. He is the only figure in all of human history who ships with brand guidelines. And the thing he's supposed to represent ran for something like 300,000 years, across every landscape on the planet, in more climates and cultures than we will ever be able to count. For all of that, we issued one outfit, one posture, and one facial expression, which sits somewhere between confused and mildly inconvenienced. Almost none of it survives contact with the evidence. Not the cave, not the club, not the mammoth, and definitely not the face. So where did that guy come from? Because he did not come out of the ground. Somebody drew him. Recently, and on purpose. Which makes him worth taking apart. Where these people actually slept, what they actually ate, what they knew how to make, and what they actually looked like. The cartoon isn't a rough approximation that needs tightening up. It's pointed the wrong way. The cave is the part you didn't invent, and nobody's blaming you for it. The evidence really does come out of caves. Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira. Open any textbook, click any documentary, and the camera is inside a cave within 90 seconds. The record is overwhelmingly cave-shaped, and the name we handed these people just reads that record back to us out loud. The problem is that caves are not where people lived. They're where things last. There's a word for this, taphonomy, which is just the study of everything that happens to an object between the moment it gets dropped and the moment somebody finds it. And it plays favorites. A camp built in the open is wood, hide, grass, cord, ash, and garbage. Add rain, sun, frost, worms, and a couple of animals who cannot believe their luck, and 20 years later, you have a faint smudge in the soil. Build the identical camp inside a cave, and you get steady temperature, no rain, no sunlight, no wind, and fine sediment settling gently on top of it for the next 40,000 years. We're not looking at where humanity lived. We're looking at the one place its trash had a fighting chance. Then there's the geography, which is where the whole thing quietly falls apart. People were living across the East African savanna, out on the Russian plain, along the eastern Mediterranean coast, and all the way into Australia, by at least 50,000 years ago. Enormous stretches of that map contain no caves whatsoever. Hundreds of miles without a single limestone hole to your name. So either those populations didn't exist, or caveman is a filing error that we mistook for a description. But the part that almost never gets told isn't about caves at all. That slouching guy has an author. He has a name, a city, and a publication date. In August of 1908, 3 priests digging in a small cave in southern France hit a skull. Underneath it was a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton, the first one ever recovered in that condition, which made it the single most important human fossil on Earth at that moment. They sent it to Paris, to Marcellin Boule, the most authoritative man in France for the job. He studied it for 3 years and published his reconstruction between 1911 and 1913. The Titanic sank in the middle of that publication run. Boule's Neanderthal had a head thrust forward off the shoulders, knees that never fully straightened, and a flat, shuffling walk. And the big toe splayed off to the side, like a thumb. A grasping foot. An ape's foot. Nothing in the bones asked for that toe. The skeleton had genuine problems. This was an old man with bad arthritis, and you can see it in him. But when the bones were gone through again, decades later, the arthritis didn't account for the posture Boule had drawn. And No deformity in that foot, none, could produce a big toe pointing sideways. The modern verdict is blunt. Boule's own preconceptions did the work. He had already decided Neanderthals were a dead-end branch with no relation to us, and the reconstruction made that argument in a form you didn't need to read French to understand. Every caveman you have ever seen descends from that drawing. The cartoon, the serial mascot, the museum diorama, the shambling extra in every prehistory documentary, the guy in the car insurance ads. One skeleton, read by one man who arrived at his conclusion before the crate was open. Two anatomists went back to the same bones in 1957 and pointed out that a healthy Neanderthal, washed and shaved and put in a suit, could ride the New York subway without earning a second glance. That correction is close to 70 years old now. It is still losing badly. If the cave is a filing error, the obvious question is where people actually slept. And answering that takes a very particular kind of luck because the answer is built out of things that rot. In 1989, drought and heavy pumping dropped the Sea of Galilee by several meters. Bad news for Israel's water supply. Spectacular news for anyone holding a trowel. The retreating shoreline uncovered a campsite that had been sitting underwater for 23,000 years. It's called Ohalo II, and people have spent decades digging it. 6 oval brush huts, built from oak and willow, cut somewhere nearby. Open-air hearths just outside them. And on the floors, laid down deliberately, grass bedding, the oldest bedding anyone has ever found anywhere on Earth. 23,000 years is 10,000 years before anybody on the planet planted a seed on purpose. You're inside one of those huts. The floor gives a little under you, because somebody gathered armfuls of grass and spread it across the spot where people sleep. The fire is a few steps out the door, where the smoke has somewhere to go. The whole structure went up in a day or two, and when the group moves on, it stays behind. That camp exists for us only because the lake came back fast and sealed it under fine silt. Every other camp like it, and there were hundreds of thousands of them, simply dissolved. Same story out on the Ukrainian plain, minus the water. In 1965, a farmer at Mezherik was digging out his cellar and hit a wall made of bone. What he had found were dwellings framed from the bones of dozens of mammoths, roughly 15,000 years old, standing in open country with no cave for a very long walk in any direction. People built houses. They built them out of whatever the landscape was handing them that year. Which, if you think about the alternative for about 4 seconds, is the obvious call. A cave is dark, damp, cold, and has no airflow, so your fire has nowhere to send its smoke, and there's a solid chance something with claws already holds the lease on the back of it. And those mammoth bones raise the other question, because in the cartoon, the mammoth isn't dinner. It's the job description. Run the logistics for a moment. A mammoth is something like 8 tons of meat with no refrigeration attached to it. Bringing one down is a windfall, a genuinely dangerous, coordinated, worth remembering forever windfall. Nobody was pulling that off on a Tuesday, and if they had been, the mammoths would have run out a lot sooner than they did. Ohalo shows you what Tuesday actually looked like. Alongside the huts came more than 100,000 plant remains, from something like 140 different species. Fish bones, hair, birds, and grinding stones worn down from processing wild cereals. Grain prep, 10,000 years ahead of farming. The whole place reads less like a hunting camp than a kitchen with a lake view. The same picture turns up somewhere much less expected. Your teeth build up hardened plaque, the gunk a hygienist scrapes off. And it traps microscopic crumbs of whatever you were eating, then fossilizes around them beautifully. So, somebody went looking inside the plaque on Neanderthal teeth, from a cave in Iraq and a cave in Belgium. Bad brushing habits, it turns out, are how you leave a receipt for dinner. They found starch grains, date palm, beans, and wild barley. And a good share of those grains were warped in the specific way starch warps when it has been heated in water. They were cooking it. 2 Neanderthal groups, 2,000 miles apart, one somewhere warm, and one somewhere freezing. Both eating plants, and both cooking them into something softer and easier to digest. The original paleo diet was mostly vegetables. Some of it was porridge. That cave in Iraq has one more thing in it. He's called Shanidar I, a man who died in his 40s, which for a Neanderthal counted as old age. The list of what had happened to him runs long. A crushing injury to the left side of the face, severe enough that he was probably blind in that eye. A withered right arm that ended somewhere above the wrist. Damage down the right leg and foot that would have made every step slow and painful. All of it healed. Every one of those injuries shows bone that grew back over it. And bone only does that if you stay alive long enough for it to happen. He lived for years like that. One working arm, half his sight, a bad leg. In a landscape that owed him nothing. He was not feeding himself. Somebody else was doing it. Somebody kept bringing him along when the group moved, and kept giving him a place near the fire, year after year, while he brought back almost nothing that a group in that situation needed. That's the species we handed a club and a grunt. Underneath all of it sits the real insult. The one that made the caveman funny instead of merely wrong. Stupidity is a hard thing to test in a skeleton. What you can test is technology, and specifically technology that requires holding a plan in your head across many steps and more than one season. Which brings us to a pile of fired clay from Dolní Věstonice, in what's now the Czech Republic, from a camp occupied around 26,000 years ago. Pressed into that clay were impressions, the ghost of something that had touched the surface before it hardened. The impressions were fabric, woven cloth, cord, netting, basketry, the oldest weaving known anywhere in the world. The fabric itself was long gone. What survived was the dent it left on its way out. Fewer than 1 in 100 clay fragments carried an impression at all. Nobody invents weaving on a whim. You harvest the right plants at the right point in the season, soak the stems until everything except the fiber rots away, spin what's left into thread, then build a structure and hold tension across it with your hands for hours at a stretch. It's a chain of decisions where the payoff shows up weeks after the first one. Miss the harvest window, and you're waiting a full year for another shot at a basket. It also rearranges who was feeding everybody. A net doesn't catch one hare. It catches a lot of hares, and working a net is group labor, which puts food in the hands of exactly the people the cartoon never bothers to draw, standing somewhere behind the guy with the club. Then somebody went back to the famous Venus figurines and found them wearing things. Woven caps, belts, a skirt, carved in enough detail that you can tell which technique made the fabric. Somebody sat there and rendered the weave correctly in stone. And by the standards of this story, 26,000 years ago is recent. Blombos Cave sits on the southern coast of South Africa, a few hours east of Cape Town. Out of a layer roughly 73,000 years old came a flake of stone with 9 lines on it, 6 running one way, 3 cutting across them. Under a microscope, the lines turned out to be red ochre, applied deliberately with the pointed tip of what amounts to a crayon. It's the oldest drawing made by a human being that anyone has ever found, and it beats the next oldest by something like 30,000 years. The team that found it is careful about the word art. What they'll commit to is that it's a symbol. Somebody made a mark that meant something to somebody else, and yes, that one came out of a cave. Which is the whole point. It's the reason we still have it. We called them stupid because the clever things they built were made of plant fiber, and plant fiber is gone in a season. We graded a civilization on its rocks. So, back to that pelt. The one hanging off a single shoulder and fastened to nothing. Dolní Věstonice again. Same ground, same window of time. Turned up bone needles with eyes punched through them. Around 25,000 years old. A needle with a hole in it has exactly one job, which is to pull thread through material so that separate pieces can be joined into a shape that fits a specific body. Fitted, tailored, sewn clothing, roughly 20,000 years before anybody got around to inventing the wheel. Blombos has something to say about the look, too. In a layer twice as old as the drawing, a full 100,000 years, the same cave gave up what can only be described as a workshop. 2 abalone shells being used as mixing containers, holding ground ochre, crushed bone, charcoal, and fat, along with the stones used to grind and stir the mixture. That's a recipe. Ingredients, sequence, equipment. Somebody's mixing bowl, left in the sink for 100,000 years. The same site has produced small shell beads worn smooth where a cord ran through them. 100,000 years ago, people were manufacturing color and stringing jewelry. Whatever they thought they looked like, they clearly had opinions about it. As for the face, the best red one we have belongs to a man pulled out of a cave in Somerset, England, and known ever since as Cheddar Man. He's about 10,000 years old, Britain's oldest near-complete skeleton. Researchers drilled a 2mm hole into the hardest bone in the human body, deep inside the inner ear, and got out enough surviving DNA to read his genome. Dark to black skin pigmentation. Blue eyes. Dark curly hair. That combination lands nowhere near what anyone expects. And he isn't a fluke. He matches other Europeans from the same era, from Spain to Hungary. Pale skin showed up in Europe late, arriving with farming populations thousands of years after Cheddar Man was buried in that cave. So the standard caveman manages to be wrong in both directions at once. Wrong about the clothes, because they were sewing garments to fit. Wrong about the face, because that face was assembled in 1911 to look like a shabbier relative of the people doing the assembling. All of it lands in the same place. Stone survives. Bone survives, sometimes under the right conditions. Teeth and ash survive. String, baskets, bedding, food, medicine, clothing, language, music, names, jokes, and who was in love with whom survive not at all. The caveman was never a portrait of early humans. He's a portrait of the 4 or 5 materials that outlast everything else, with a personality bolted on afterward by somebody with opinions. Try running it on your own evening, tonight, specifically. You'll eat something that's mostly plants, heated in water, cooked soft enough to be easy to chew and easy to digest. You'll sit near a light source until you don't need it anymore. Then you'll lie down on a soft surface that somebody manufactured on purpose for that exact use, a few steps from where the food is kept, near people you'd rather not sleep far away from. Now give that room 20,000 years. The bedding is gone. The food is gone. The clothes are gone. The conversation is gone. Every reason you had for arranging any of it that way is gone. What's left is a ceramic mug handle, a metal fork, and your fillings. Anybody working from that alone would write you a hard, cold, silent little life. They weren't a rough draft of us. They were us, with worse luck in the ground. So look around the room you're sitting in, and find the one object that's still going to be there in 20,000 years. Then decide what a stranger should be allowed to conclude about your entire life from it.